Now that we've completed the cash budget, I'd like to just review where we are in terms of our 7 steps to maximize value. We're working on which one? Managing cash flow, right? And what we did as we came through the beginning of this course is we started in the past, and our time sequence has been past, present, future. So when we looked at ratios, our tool to monitor financial position was ratios, and that was in the past. That was all past history, right? And then we said, okay, we're going to create a plan, and that plan will be in the present, and when we execute that plan, it will be out in the future. Isn't that right? And we got that done, and then we said, okay, now let's take a look at the income statement, and our tool was break even, right? And that gave us a handle on where we are today and where our cost structure is today. And then what we said is, the only thing we can control is the future, so we need to move forward, and we did a profit plan and a cash budget. That's what we've just finished. The top 9 lines, lines 1 through 9, profit plan, right? We recognized our revenue when? When we earned it, and we recognized our expense when we incurred it. Isn't that right? And we said that gives us a good idea, a good opportunity to match the revenue we earned against the expenses we expended to earn it, so we had a good handle on whether we were making any money. But since when we recorded that revenue, for instance in January, the sales of 71.5 didn't come in until 2 months later, right? So it didn't give us a very good handle on cash flow. And this points out 2 different kinds of accounting that we need to be aware of, and those are what? Accrual accounting, which we're looking at in our income statement projection, but the weakness is cash flow. So let's develop just a little graph. If we've got accrual accounting, what's the strength of that? Focusing on profitability. And the weakness? Focusing on cash flow. But indeed, now we go down to lines 13 through 25, and that was our checkbook. We're focusing on what? Cash. And essentially, this is the cash basis of accounting, isn't it? And the strength of the cash basis of accounting is focusing on cash flow. But weakness being what? It doesn't give us as good a picture of profitability. But when we put them both together, as we have on our cash budget form, we get a picture of both. Isn't that right? And what we've done is we've taken a look at this and we've plotted this out. I asked you first, what I basically did is I said, here's his pattern, let's plot it out. And then we pulled those numbers off and created a graph, didn't we? And the graph basically looks how? We graphed 3 lines, didn't we? Which ones? Lines 1, which was sales. Sales went up and back down, didn't they? Line 9, which is profits, up and down, but on a little less grand of a scale. And then cash, which seemed to be, what, all over the map? 3 lines, and what we want to do, our goal in this section is to understand how patterns change, what affects those patterns, and how we can manage 2 cycles, the profit cycle and the cash cycle. Now, when we looked at his sales, what's the pattern we've got? Seasonal. Common, uncommon? Common. Pretty common, isn't it? Pretty common. Let's think about it. Some examples. Beer distributor. Seasonal around what? We'd expect that to be summer, wouldn't we? Seasonal around summer, and indeed we usually see that, except possibly in parts of the country where summer is really, really hot and everyone leaves, it's possible that something could be, in effect, counter-cyclic, isn't it? Jewelry. I was involved for a long time in the jewelry business. Jewelry tends to have 2 patterns, 2 peaks, if you will. One in spring for what? Weddings. And one around Christmas for, not divorces, Christmas. Patterns. Probably the most seasonal pattern I ever saw was a gentleman, and his job, he sat in on one of our programs. His job was, he was the store Santa. You remember when you used to go to the department store and sit on Santa's lap? And he actually had a contract with a store that had multiple locations, so he hired other Santas. And what was his revenue curve? What would his revenue curve look like? Right? If he misses his season, he's pretty much out of luck, isn't he? Not a lot of, now, he could possibly, and in businesses that are really seasonal, lawn and garden care, typically around, again, spring and summer, right? Not so much in the fall. But in parts of the country that have a strong winter, what will those people who do yard care do during the winter? Snow. They'll do snow removal. Or they'll make enough money doing yard care that they'll go somewhere and relax for 4 or 5 months. Isn't that right? A lot of seasonal patterns, right? A lot of seasonal patterns. Everybody, and can we plot it out? Absolutely. And in most of these businesses that I've described, what would we expect the shape of that pattern to be year after year? Similar, wouldn't we? Similar. It might go up or down, or it might move one way or the other, depending on whether it's weather-related or whatever. But in fact, it's probably going to be pretty similar, which means it creates a predictive quality, doesn't it? We can then predict this and what's going on. Now let's take a look at our guy. And again, when we plotted it out, what's his seasonal pattern? We've got a strong line there. When we tracked line 1, we've got a strong line. And how did it look? Seasonal around what? Summer. Spring, May, right? Spring into early summer. Went up, and then it comes back down, correct? And when we looked at the pattern, what's his profit pattern doing? How does it look? How does it look relative to the sales pattern? It's got roughly the same shape, doesn't it? But it's a lot lower. At any point, what's causing it to be lower? The difference between the sales and the profits. What is that? Essentially, that's 2 lines that describe what? Between sales and profits. Which financial statement? The income statement. The income statement. And what comes between the top line and the bottom line? Two groups of things, right? Cost of goods sold and operating expenses. And the cost of goods sold, if you'll recall, we spread as an even percentage, a consistent percentage, and the operating expenses we spread how? Do you remember? We took the 307 and divided it by 12, right? So we spread them evenly. Now somebody might make the case that in a strongly seasonal business it would be unusual to spread the expenses evenly. Isn't that right? How would we expect maybe they would be spread? Into your higher season, you'd cram more expenses. In October, what do department stores start hiring for? The Christmas rush, if you will, or what they hope will be the Christmas rush, right? Now, what impact would that have if we made it perhaps a little more realistic? People sometimes think, oh, well, gosh, it'll change the whole thing. The effect is if we put more of the operating expenses into the higher sales months, that would have what impact on the green line? It would flatten it a bit. And if we put fewer expenses into the lower sales months, it would do what to the green line? It would bring it up a bit. The effect then would simply be to do what? Take the green line and just flatten it out a bit. But it's still going to be roughly the same shape, isn't it? Now, what's going on with cash? It appears that as sales go up, cash is doing what? Going down. And if you recall, I asked you a few questions about what we thought it would do, and that's when we changed the sales pattern. We're not going to change the sales pattern yet. What I want to do is I want to take a trip through this. I want to take a trip through this cash flow, because I think as we go through, that will help us get a handle on what's really going on. So let's do that. And the way we're going to do that is really simple. What I'd like you to do is write down through your peak sales month, which is what? May. I'd like you to draw a vertical line. I'd like you to draw a vertical line right down through the peak sales month. On the left-hand side, I'd like you to label that with a letter and a number. What would that be? B for, and on the other side, obviously, after. Before and after. Now let's talk about what's going to be happening in this business as we go through this thing, okay? On the front end, what's the first thing? What was the first line we filled in? What was the first line we filled in when we plotted out this thing?
Sales.
Sales, which was line, oh, by the way, sales was line 1, wasn't it? Cash was line, profits were line 9, and cash was line 25, wasn't it? All right, so sales are going to go up. Isn't that what starts happening at the beginning of this whole thing? Sales start rising. And we would expect that they do every year, huh? We would hope they do every year. Maybe that's a good thing, hope here. And when sales rise, what does he need more of in his business? He needs more inventory. So his inventory is going to go up, isn't it? Now, what do we say to someone who says, oh, no, that my business is different. My sales can go up without my inventory going up. Can we think of maybe some what we'll call unusual examples or some aberrations? Well, what's one way? Start with a whole bunch too much. That's what Cascade did. Now, that's not a great solution because that means he's been out of cash for a long time, doesn't it? But that means that he would be able to then sell it, assuming it's what? Saleable, and it's not junk. What's another way he could do this? And we've already looked at that as we evaluated Cascade. Without increasing his inventory. As sales go up, turn that inventory what? Faster. Now, if he turns it, and if he could increase the rate of turn conceptually to match the rate of sales growth, is it conceivable in your mind without doing the math that could actually, if he's doing a really good job of buying the right stuff, that he could work out of this pool right here, and if he turns it, sales are going up 10%, the rate of turn goes up 10%. Makes sense, at least, from the standpoint of there's some relationship. It may not be linear, but there's some mathematical relationship there. What if he turns it too fast? Then the cupboard is bare. He gets E7103 ring mandrel, BO, back ordered. That will bring sales down, won't it? That will bring sales down. There's a right level of turn for every industry, huh? So if you could turn it faster. By and large, though, if we operate according to Pareto, he's the 80-20 guy, you know, 80% of the time, someone else said, well, wait a minute, I'm a service business. Well, in that case, we don't worry about the inventory, do we? Because we don't have inventory, except it's called time. And we'll then look at what's happening with his staffing. If he's operating at full capacity and his sales are going up 20%, then possibly his staffing is going up 20%. The problem is, it's hard to hire a 20%. Well, actually, it's not hard to hire a 20%. You just don't want to. Slightly different issue, still works the same, though. Basically, for purposes of the big picture, let's assume that when sales go up and he carries inventory, it's going to rise, isn't it? And we'll let him tell us about the exceptions if he can prove it. All right? Also, what else is he going to need if he's selling on credit? What else is going to go up? Receivables will go up, won't they? Receivables will go up if he's selling on credit, won't they? Now, what do we say to someone who tells us, no, my business is different. My sales can go up without my receivables rising. Is that true? Possibly. If his receivables are turning at a constant rate, if sales go up, the receivables will rise, won't they? So what does he have to do to make them not rise? Again, we could use the same conceptual logic, couldn't we? If his sales are going up at 20% and he can increase his turn rate of receivables, which means he's doing what to the days? Cranking them down. In other words, he's putting more pressure on people to pay sooner. So they turn faster. What's the ultimate fast? COD. Is that the ultimate fast? I would disagree. I would say the ultimate fast would be CBD. Cash before delivery. Take a what? Deposit. A prepayment. How big?
As big as you can get.
Excuse me? As big as you can get. Don't sugarcoat it. Of course, as big as you can get. If you can get them to pay more than the value, well, no, probably not that much. Now, let's put this in the context of something we looked at back in section 2, the working capital cycle. Let's overlay the working capital cycle on this and see how it looks. Cash to inventory to accounts receivable and back to cash. Fair enough? That's the working capital cycle, huh? Now, here we go. Sales go up, and what's happening? Everything that comes in, what's he doing? All the money. Look, go to January. That's your first month, right? The sales are going to begin to rise. Everything that comes in that he collects, what's he going to do? He's going to reinvest it in inventory and receivables to support this growing level of sales. And he reinvests enough based on his pattern. Where does he end up first month on line 25? Overdrafted, how much? 19.5. So what does he do? He goes to the bank and he says, bank, put some money in. I need some help. And the bank says what? Okay. What happens the second month? Sales go up, inventory rises, receivables rise. He reinvests everything that comes in supporting now a what? A higher level of sales. And where does he end up on line 25? The second month. He's back at the bank. It's only been 30 days, and he's back. And what does he say? Bank, I need more. And they say, okay. What happens the third month? Sales go up, which causes a need for more inventory and more receivables. He reinvests to support those sales. And where does he end up in the third month? OD'd again. How much is he OD'd at the end of March? 50,300. So he shows up at the end of March. Now let's play this out. He shows up at the bank and says, I need more money. And what's the bank starting to think? I have been trained to spot patterns. And I see one. Every month, you're what? Out. And he said, don't worry, this will do it. This will get me over the hump. And the bank says, I don't know, this is quite a bit. He's already got 60,000 borrowed, right? And now he wants 55 more, isn't that about right? And what does the bank decide? Well, wait a minute, it's just the end of the first quarter here. How'd you do? Maybe we ought to, this is a little bit more than we had anticipated, so maybe we need to see a set of financial statements. So how'd he do? Let's assume it plays out exactly this way. What's the profit going to look like if we accumulate them from his first 3 months of operation? His first quarterly statement. He lost 8,300, and then what?
Lost 47.
Lost 4,700. In other words, for the first 3 months of the year, he's got an operating loss. So I'm sitting here saying, okay, let me get this straight. I would have loaned you $115,000 so you could lose about 10. And you're going to want me to loan, no, I don't need any more. Well, that's a good thing. I'm trying to understand this, and my borrowers, does he need it? Yeah, why? He's already spent it. And what's starting to happen with the communication lines here? We're starting to develop some polite adversity, I'd call it. You know, tense in the neck, huh? He needs it, and now this is the first time he's ever gotten what? From the bank? A pushback. And then we can see what the possibilities are. He could take the attitude, oh, wait a minute. I've been banking here for a long time. And what are they thinking? And maybe not so much longer. Unclear here. Again, this is going to come down to communication. And after we get all these tools built, we'll talk about communicating with financial advisors, be they bankers, the SBDC, the accounting profession, this language we talked about. We got to put these tools into action. Now, what I want to know is, what's causing this? What's causing him to come up short? Would you concur with my assessment that essentially he's buying assets faster than he's collecting them? So he's in this cycle. He's buying them down here and reinvesting them up here. And why is he buying those assets called inventory and receivables? To support what?
Sales.
Sales. So he's out of money because he's buying assets called inventory and receivables, or what we might term WC, working capital, faster than he's collecting them. And he's buying them to support the sales. Isn't that right? Ergo, what is it that's causing him to run out of money? Sales. Do you think that is an obvious conclusion from the business community? This seems to me to be one of those myths out there. No, if I have more sales, I will have more money, because intuitively it seems that way. It's not the sales themselves that are causing him to run out of money. It's the assets he has to buy to support the sales, and that's over on the balance sheet. That's not an income statement issue. But it's his sales. Your sales are causing you to run out of money. How do you suppose that's going to fly when I communicate that to him? One of these. What? Now, finally, he gets to May. He has what kind of sales in May? He has record sales in May. Isn't that right? And what do you have when you have record sales? A party. And what does he discover on line 25 in May? He doesn't have enough money to pay for the party. So he uses a bank card, has the party anyway, and figures I can always take care of this in a couple of days when I come back. If I have record sales, I ought to have money. So in the back of his mind, now that doesn't stop him from partying. It's not that far in the front of his mind yet. Now what happens in the after side, after May? Now sales begin to what? Drop. Can you imagine the same process occurring? In effect, he was here, he bought the assets, he bought the assets faster than he was collecting. Now by June, what's he done? He's gone over the top, and he's now collecting faster than he's repaying. Isn't that right? And what happens in June? He all of a sudden has what? Money left. He has money left because he needs inventory. His inventory needs now go what? Down. His receivables needs now go down because he's selling less. He will generate fewer receivables. Isn't that right? And he ends up with money. So what does he do? Unless he spent it at the party. he goes to the bank and says, now I'm going to start paying back the bank. And of course, that's the classic model of a seasonal line of credit, isn't it? You borrow it down when you need it, and you pay it back when you have it. Doesn't that make sense? So he does that. Then what happens in July? Sales drop a lot. He needs a lot less inventory, a lot less receivables. And isn't it in July where he has a whole chunk of money? There on line 25. And so he pays back a big chunk of money. Isn't that right? Pays back a big chunk of money back to the bank. August, sales drop again. How much? Well, they don't drop a lot, but they're still way down, aren't they? He's got money. Isn't that right? He's got money. How much? How much does he pay back this time? $50,000. September's an interesting month. Besides the kids going back to school. What else? Well, what happens up on lines 1 through 9? His sales continue to drop enough that now he doesn't have enough gross profit to cover his operating expenses, and he records again a what? A loss. A loss on his P&L. Interestingly enough, let's look down at his checkbook. How's he doing? He's thinking, oh my God, I lost money. How'd he do in the checkbook? He's got $30,000 so he can continue to pay. Do you suppose he wonders why that's happening? I doubt it. He's going, money, cool. I can pay back. He continues to pay the bank. What is it now that's causing him to be able to why can he repay? This is at the core of what's going on when we have a pattern such as this. What is it that causes him to what was it that caused him in the before cycle to have to borrow? Sales were going up and he was buying assets called inventory and receivables faster than he was collecting. What is it that caused him to have money? The fact that sales went down is why he has money. We continue to play this out till the end of the year, and when does he finally get that whole $220 that he had borrowed paid back? What's the last month when he makes his payment? December, which is also the last month of his fiscal year, isn't it? Now, just a quick thought. If this plays out this way, how much room for error? Precious little. If we go back to his ratio scorecard from the last 3 years, which we took a brief look at on the front end, how much room for error does he appear to need? Quite a lot. Now, if you happen to be sitting over on the lender's chair, what are you going to believe? What someone tells you they're going to do with a plan, because you recall, I can get an accountant to do a plan. It's whether I can pull the trigger on it or not. And are you going to believe a plan which hasn't happened yet, or 3 years of actual? I think we believe what people do more than what they say. Unless they've been matched up, and when they say they're going to do something, they do it for years, then we probably do believe it. But right now, when there's a significant disconnect between 3 years of history and a projection, what, have you been to a seminar or something? Did you make this purely for my benefit? Let me ask you, how are you going to... He needs some room for error, doesn't he? And it's not there. Simple. Now, am I going to question that? So I might want to know what? How are you going to do A, B? Do you have some detail on what your plan is to do A, B, C, D? How are you going to do the sales? How are you going to keep the margins where they are? How are you going to keep your collection cycle even where it is here? Because we've seen it deteriorating. How about your inventory turns? We've seen them deteriorating. What are you going to do? Have you got a plan, or have you got a bunch of numbers on a page? So this is the reflection of the plan, but somewhere there's some substance that's the action behind it, isn't it? Sales go up, they come down. On the front end, he buys the assets faster than he's collecting, and it's sales that causes him to run out of money. On the back side, sales go down. Isn't that right? Sales drop down. And because he has to therefore invest less, the collections are now coming in faster than he's reinvesting. And he finally gets back down to zero. The pattern. What is the pattern as far as our cash flow pattern as it relates to sales? We know that sales and profits have a pattern that's sort of similar because on the P&L we recorded them when we earned the money and when we incurred the expense, accrual accounting. Pretty similar. Cash appears to go the opposite way, doesn't it? Sales go up, cash goes down. Sales go down, cash comes up. It also looks like there's a lag there, doesn't it? Looks like there's a lag. It could be that 60 days of collection lag, maybe, but I think it's even more than that. Now, the question I have is, what happens if sales keep going? What will happen if sales keep going? Before, after. What's it going to do?
If he doesn't do anything else, he's going to run out of cash.
If he doesn't do, it will keep, if sales keep going north, cash will keep going south. I believe this is almost 100% counterintuitive. I believe it's almost 100% counterintuitive. I can't tell you how many times I've stood in front of groups, and when I say that, I see one of these. Just doesn't seem right. Now, what's really happening if sales keep going up? And I know one of the things you're thinking is, well, it possibly depends on the rate of sales. Now, right now, I've sort of extended it at just about the same rate, haven't I? Maybe if it was down a little lower. And there is some rate, and we're going to actually explore that in the next section when we talk about what's really going on specifically on the balance sheet. But for right now, I just made an assumption about the same rate. Fair enough? So what will be happening? Let's just talk through the logic here. If sales keep going up, what will he need more of?
Inventory.
No, isn't there? You come to that point where you get a letter and it says, congratulations, you can keep growing your sales, but you don't have to buy any more inventory. Problem is the letter never comes. It must be lost in the post. This is going to continue, isn't it? As long as he's turning it at a constant rate, if sales keep going up, he's going to need more inventory. And if sales keep going up and he's selling on credit, he's going to need more receivables. And in fact, he might get so jazzed about this that he gives people what? Better terms, because he sees how he can grow sales. He discovers that terms are one of those sales components. And he decides to give better terms. That would actually do what? That would take this, and instead of being linear, he could curve it down, right? He could arc it downward. I don't think this is intuitive at all. So let's ask a couple of questions about this. Number one, is this what would happen? Yes, it is. And occasionally, I've had someone sit in my program, and they'll sit there and they'll go, what word? Aha. I just figured out what happened. But it happened to them how? You know, the image of the American football quarterback standing there watching his receiver waiting to break free. What's coming from behind him? A very large defensive lineman who probably runs faster than he does. And he's standing there pretty relaxed, and all of a sudden what's going to happen? Bend. You get to bend in strange angles, and the ball flies up in the air because you get blindsided. You didn't see it coming. That's what these profit mastery tools are all about, is to eliminate what? The blind sides. We can see this coming. We can see this coming. So I'm sitting in my office, my customer's across the desk. He's had roughly this kind of experience. And we said, we can't go any farther right now. This is what's going on. And my comment was, it's your sales that are causing the problem. And he looks at me, he stands up, he puts his hands on the desk. I thought, oh my gosh, he's coming over. And he says, I knew it. Lefevre, you're an idiot. And I said, well, one of us is an idiot. He said, you don't understand. I said, well, one of us doesn't understand. I said, explain it to me then. He said, you're wrong. I said, you explain it to me then. He said, here's what you've missed. Aren't you aware that if my sales keep going up, my profits will do what? My profits will keep going up. Can you imagine that that's possible? Yes, I can imagine that's possible. And I said, and he said, that's it. If your sales keep going up, your profits will keep going up. And I said, I agree. And he goes, don't patronize me. And I said, no, I agree. I said, now I have the rest of the story. I now have to, and I said, please be careful not to shoot the messenger. Profits are not what? Cash. Until they go all the way through that cycle and end up back in your checkbook. At the end of the year, if this happened at the end of the year, is it conceivable he could record a lot of profits? Yes. Would he have the cash? No. Where would it be sitting? In receivables and inventory. So then at the end of the year, along about March, what would he do? He would come back in next year and want to borrow some money to pay what? His taxes that he has to pay on these big profits that he doesn't have the money for. And I'm thinking, what? You want to borrow money to do what? Pay your taxes? And I'm looking for a source of repayment? I'll call the federal government and say, is there a chance you can get it back to me? What's the other possibility here? If we think back over our history, we had a time along about the early 80s. This was happening. This was happening. The economy was going great guns. All we did in banking was we looked at the P&L at that time. We never really took a look at cash flow. We didn't become cash flow lenders till the 90s. We took a look at this and said, as long as profits are going up, everything is what? A-okay. And then what happened? In the space of 7 months in the early part of the 80s, the prime rate went from 6 to what? 22. With all this debt that's being piled up, you change the interest rate from 6 to 22%. Can you imagine that interest acting like a big weight on that black profit line and starting to pull down on it? And all of a sudden, at some point, that massive amount of interest turns it down. We still had great sales, but all of a sudden, because of the interest, what happened? Boom, profits declined. And what did we do? Shockwave across the economy. Everybody goes, hold it. Profits are down, that's what we've been looking at. Oh my gosh. We're up when we say what? Too much debt. We need the money back. Can you give it to us? Well, we'll give you 3 days. Tantamount to saying what? We have a fire burning, I got to put it out. Could you pass me some gas? I want to pour that on it. If we hadn't panicked, we probably could have worked through this, but we panicked. And then what happens? All those people who everybody was saying what? Borrow money. Borrow money. You got to go out and borrow money. You've got this piece of land as a farmer. Expand. Buy that piece of land. Use the equity in this one to leverage that one. So you do. You sign it. Then what happens? Just about now, what's about to happen? That hailstorm It comes right over, it misses Iowa and hits Illinois. Boom. Right when you're going to need the money, what happens to the crop? Corn, it turns out, is a lot less productive when it's horizontal. And then what happens? Can't pay. And so what do? They send someone out to do what from the bank? You've been repossessing cars. Now we want you to go out and repossess what? Farms. Well, it was easy with cars. Just hot wire them and take them before they wake up. Repo man. But with the farm, doesn't quite work as well. He shows up to repossess, and what does he discover? Farmers own guns. And the steel wool that he used to hotwire the car doesn't work that well. All because we didn't know what was happening here, and when you sign at the bottom line, you need to know what the pattern is. You need to know what the risks are instead of finding them out too late. And we need to also, on the other side, we got to work together here, not panic. If I'm a fundamentally sound business, I can probably survive. He wasn't fundamentally sound going in, was he? He's probably got a bigger problem. We can separate those two and not just lump everybody in the same category and do what? Crisis response. Now, sales go north, cash goes south. Built-in control mechanism. At some point, what's going to happen? What line on our cash flow makes it work for him and gets him to the next month? What line? What number is it? 26. Who is that? The bank. At some point, what's the bank going to say? Hold her, Newt. She's heading for the rhubarb, right? Customer doesn't see it. Doesn't see it coming. We can manage this. There are some things we need to do. Well, one of them is what? If I tell my customer, well, you got to grow less, what are they going to think? What are you, nuts? Everybody's trying to grow. We want to grow as fast as we can. Only if we can what? Pay for it. Only if we can pay for it. Otherwise, it usually ends up in a train wreck. That's just general opinion. Now, let's talk a little bit. I'd like you to take out, I did 2 other projections here besides the one you did. Ours assume, now if you don't like what you see, what do? Change it. Be more efficient. Manage it better. We're talking about efficiency here. Manage it better. Let's pick one thing. Collect the receivables better. We projected, as you recall, and I put it in the upper right-hand corner of your cash flow projection, your cash budget, 60 days. Now here's what I'd like you to do. I'd like you to, the next page, I said, let's assume we could collect in what? 45 days. Ah, that's good. An improvement of what? 2 weeks. And I redid it. Now here's what I'd like you to do. I'd like you to circle on line 28 the ending cash. Do it on both the 2 you're looking at. The one you did, we already know it, but do it anyway. And then the one that I just, the next one that I did. So in the 60-day one, our ending cash was what, 7,400? And the other thing I would like you to circle is the biggest number on line 29, the biggest cumulative borrowing. Circle that as well. In the one we did, it was 220, right? What is it if we just collect 2 weeks faster? 135, and the ending cash goes up to what? 50,300. By changing what? One parameter by 2 weeks. Now, let's get real aggressive here. Take out the next cash flow that I did, and I'm assuming now, I just reprojected this based on the hope that we could collect in how many days? 30 days. I'd like you to do that one more time. Circle the maximum borrowing and the ending cash. Circle the maximum borrowing and the ending cash. What's the maximum borrowing? 75. What's the ending cash? 93. Is that a surprise that it's that much higher? It wouldn't be a surprise if we did this regularly, but it just means we don't know the value of a day, We've already calculated that back when we talked about Cascade. 1 day of receivables for him was $8,000. A couple of weeks here could be a lot of money. Now, I put this in a little table so we could take a look at it. 60 days, 45 days, and 30 days. The high debt on line 29, 220, 135, and 75. The ending cash, 7.4, 50, and 93. We're still going to make how much profit on line 9, the cumulative of line 9 on the far right? We're still going to make 43. We're just going to make it conceivably more efficiently. Now, some of you are thinking, but wait a minute. If he had less debt, his interest would be lower and his profit would actually be higher. I agree. I didn't quite go that far. That's one of those benefit things that's like extra credit. It's extra. I didn't even go that far. But now what I'd like to do is just say, okay, so what's a day worth? Let's see, in 60 days, he brings home, he's got 7,400. If he can drop it to 30 days, he'll have 93,000. That's an improvement of how many days from 60 to 30? 30 days, and it's an improvement of how much in cash flow? About 86, would you agree? Let me just round it to 90 for reasons which will become apparent in just a moment, all right? So if 30 days is $90,000 of cash flow difference, what would 1 day be worth in this business? If 30 days is worth 90, what's 1 day worth? $3,000. So every day he can crank it down, it's like somebody handing him what? $3,000. The ability to measure. We can take any business and pull this story out of it. Now he says to us, oh, wait a minute, I can't get to 30 days. The industry's at 42. I'm going, okay, then why are you at 60? Who's he going to attract at 60 if the industry's at 42? The deadbeats, who are eventually, it actually isn't going to be 60, but he doesn't know it yet because it hasn't been 60 days. What's it actually going to be? Never.
Never.
It's going to be never, and he's going to then increase his bad debt expense, and then that 43 comes into question because when his expenses go up, his profit goes down. So let's just do it at 42. That's an improvement from his current level of 60 days of how much? 18 days. How much a day? 3,000 a day. How much cash flow impact? 54,000. And now I say, you make the call. You make the call as to whether that's worth doing or not. Sometimes you spend more money to get something than you get. Not a great trade-off. You tell me, you have to make your own choice, but now we've given you what? The numbers to do that. Now let's finish up here and talk about one last thing. That last question, what was it? Oh yeah, back to the one you did. Back to the cash projection you did. 220, that was the biggest number on line 29, right? You've got it circled now. How could he repay that? He went from 0 to 220, and it was 220 in what month? May. Okay. And then from 220 back to 0 by the end of the year. How do you do that? He went from 220 to 0. $220,000 of debt principal, and he only had $43,000 in profit. What is the answer? Is there an answer? Is it smoke and mirrors? No, it isn't. The issue is short-term debt, as we've proven here, is not repaid out of profits. It's repaid out of what? Cash flow. We buy a bunch of assets, and then we zero them out. When we say short-term, we've projected, this is a year, isn't it? Short-term is anything less than what? A year. Seasonal line of credit, meant to be what? Short-term. You buy a bunch of assets, or a project even, you buy it, you zero it out, and you pay it back. Isn't that right? So it's cash flow. Cash flow. Short-term debt is repaid out of cash flow. Right? So what do we need profits for? To repay. Long-term debt is repaid out of profits. So what do we need collateral for? An acronym, JIC. Just in case. Whenever we use collateral as a primary source of repayment, by the time you need it, what's happened to the collateral? It's in the tank, typically in the tank. It's a backup. It's a secondary source of repayment. Anytime we use collateral as a primary source, we're setting up for problems, aren't we? If we can remember this game plan, we need cash flow to repay what? Short-term debt. We need profits to repay long-term debt. You remember that was one of the 3 uses of profits. Reinvest, take it home, and repay debt. That's what we need it for. And we need collateral as a backup. As a backup. If we can structure it that way and recognize that we can plot out any pattern. Suppose I wanted to change the inventory turns in your cash flow here, the example. Could I hand you out another one and we could do this all over again? You're looking at me like, the heck I will. Well, that's what computers are for. If we put together a good computer program, we can actually take all these default variables and move them around, not to produce one that works, but to produce one that's a management tool for us. Powerful. Understanding patterns and what they do is tremendously powerful if we understand how they work. Now, we've just looked at a year, isn't that right? But most businesses, as we've focused on in this course, we've gone from the past to the present to the future. So far, our future has been a profit plan and a cash flow for 1 year. When we get back together, now we want to take a little bit longer look in this continuum of time and look at what's happening to the capital structure of the company longer term. And that'll be section 5, and we're going to call that financial gap. And when we get back together, we'll take on that one.